President Muhammadu Buhari's directive last week for a merging of or collapse of certain agencies into others marked the start of the implementation of the Steve Oronsanye Committee report. The 7-member committee had been set up by Nigeria's immediate past president, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, to explore means of rejigging the country's public service for more effective performance, as well as reduce the cost of governance. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage the land, we're now going to have a conversation about this with Professor Tunji Olaopa, who is joining us from our Rise Abuja studio. Professor Olaopa is a professor of public policy at the Lead City University in Ibadan, Oyo State, and executive vice chairman of Ibadan School of Government and Policy. He has a doctorate degree in public administration and a combination of 2 earlier degrees in political science and political theory, also from the University of Ibadan. He joined the civil service in 1988 as a chief research officer and rose to become permanent secretary in the office of the head of civil service of the Federation, permanent secretary later at the State House, and then later permanent secretary at the Ministry of Communications Technology. His areas of expertise range from public sector reform and restructuring to public analysis, policy analysis and research designs. Apart from several seminal articles in peer-reviewed journals and books, he is the author of Theory and Practice of Public Administration and Civil Service Reforms in Nigeria, Innovation and Best Practices in Public Sector Reforms, also Public Sector Reforms in Nigeria, and his most recent publication, Managing Complex Reforms. Professor Olaopa, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Ruben and Adesua. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, you are welcome. Well, I mean, this is your field. You are the public policy and reform expert. The president has given approval for the implementation of the Oronsanye Report on the restructuring and reorganization of government parastatals, agencies, and commissions. And we're told that the federal government is looking forward to October to complete the process of implementation. What's your assessment of this decision? Do you think it's a bold step in the right direction, or you think it's a good step coming rather late?
Well, it's well, the implementation of Stephen Oronsanye committee report is overdue, and I would have been surprised if the federal government not take this step at this time. Because the nation certainly is entering to some chronic recession, and the revenue has gotten very low. I'm fearing that in the next couple of months, it might be difficult for governments in Nigeria to even pay salaries. So it's only critical that they begin to look at the cost of governance and to see where efficiency saving could be secured. So for me, the Oronsanye Committee provides a critical first step in that direction. For me, it's still, even the implementation of the Oronsanye Committee, given the magnitude of efficiency saving that will help government, will still be somewhat cosmetic, but at least is a move in the right direction.
Well, Professor Olaopa, the government is assuring that this will not affect personnel. In other words, there will be no job losses. And I wonder, my question to you would be, how practicable is this, that there will be no job losses? And secondly, how far-reaching will it be actually in terms of saving costs? Because I also imagine that in right-sizing and laying off, there should be severance packages, and that might be a lot for the size of public service that we have.
Well, it's a good start. It's certainly going to be significant, but whether it's realistic to, implement within the very short term would depend on, the depth of analytics that goes even into getting, because a whole range of institutions that will be taken through, merger and acquisition have legal instruments, and it might be important to study the legal implication. Perhaps we might assume that because the chairman of the White Paper Committee, Adoke, the son, the former Attorney General, maybe that dimension would have been looked at. In terms of the magnitude of savings that will happen, for me, the numbers are large, and there will certainly be, if you go by the number, we're talking of, let me look at my notes. We're talking of some, report established that there are 541 federal parastatals commission and agencies. 263 of these statutory agencies are recommended to be reduced to 161. It is proposed, the abolition of 38 agencies, merger of 52, and a reversion of 14 to their department. Now, whether there will be redundancy, there will certainly be redundancies. Whether the government now wants to find a way of absorbing them all around the public sector is a policy decision that has to be taken. That would be a palliative. Of course, that would also have its own incidence for productivity, because you could have situations where people are collecting salaries and they are not paid. Again, you must know that the diagnosis of the public sector as we speak is that there are too many people doing too little under capacity utilization. There are too many that are technically doing nothing, and there are few people that are doing too much, which raises a whole range of human resource design issues. So for me, it's possible that the government takes that bold step for political purpose, not to retrench. Again, that would also be a smart move, because, like you have said, you can move from severance. You can move from restructuring to, to pension or to severance pay. Severance package for that huge number will be very, very, very huge in the short term. Might be government can then do some econometric analysis and see whether a huge number of those that will be affected might be people who have a few years to go, knowing that the public sector is largely populated by an aging population. So you might just say, okay, let them just spend their years, find some jobs for them to do and all of that, just spread them all across the sector so that you can save yourself from the, hassle of negotiating with union. So, all of that are possible, but in terms of the quantum of saving, I have a problem. The problem I have is that the Oronsanye Committee itself was not rooted in a public expenditure review that sets the quantum of efficiency saving target that the government has. So most of the, whole cost of governance reduction that we're talking about are mere guesswork. Okay, government itself does not know how much, it needs to recover from recurrence in order to be able to beef. Again, the standard best practice is to use benchmark. Currently, it's about 70%. Currently, it's about 70% of budget. So it must be, the government must sit down and say, okay, we want to reduce recurrence to maybe as a starting point to 60 to 55. So when that is done, then we can then do some computation, translate it into monetary terms, and we can then begin to say that, okay, how many numbers are we talking about in Oronsanye? Again, the savings from implementation of Oronsanye may not necessarily be payroll. It may not be salaries. It may also be overhead, a whole lot of embedded costs in the operation of all those institutions. So certainly there will be saving. But I will advise the government to do a little more analytics, i.e., they should try to determine the quantum of resources that must be saved as efficiency saving. And on the basis of that, we can then be looking for proxies, productivity audit. Again, we need to look at even the ministries themselves. Do we need as many ministries as we have, presently? So there are other areas where there can be saving. You can also give, like it's done in OECD in some of the advanced countries, you can give budget ceiling to each ministry and ask them to do functional review and do program redesign to be able to step down. So all of that has to happen, but that has to be rooted in number for us to know where we're going.
Well, quite correct, Prof, especially as we're told that after the restructuring, the computation that should be done, and that I think will be done, will inform the 2021 fiscal plan. I think the minister referred to that. But let me ask you, this is not the first time that Nigeria will be talking about reform within the public service sector. I mean, since 1959, we've had one initiative after the other. Then in 1999, with the Obasanjo administration, there was also a lot of talk about having a renaissance in public administration in Nigeria. But many of those reforms in the past didn't quite succeed. What are the landmines this time around that we should watch out for? Reform phobia, lack of political will, perhaps, or certain complexities that the government may then discover as they try to implement that Oronsanye report?
Well, the Oronsanye report is a little straightforward. The landmine that we should be looking at presently is how the alignment or the functions of those institutions that have been removed could be done by way of consolidation with existing institutions, could be done in a measure that does not create dysfunction, i.e., it does not, sometimes government simply does a merger and the new institution that they are matched to are doing, territorial protection and all of that, and that those functions could be lost. And invariably, those are the reasons that the system itself is not performing well. A whole lot of, for example, in the mainstream civil service, things as basic as Gazette, annual statistical, reports that MDAs are supposed to generate, the printing press and all of that, in the wake of privatization, were lost. And sincerely, those are the fundamental instruments that drive statistics, administrative statistics. So when people say Nigeria lacks a data culture, they do not look at the systemic costs, because people that don't understand the way the administrative system does work simply use, some knife and cut off functions. And those functions destroy basic functionalities on which the system relies. So I fear that if the merger and acquisition are not done thoroughly, an understanding of critical mandates that must be retained, are not done, there might be issues at the, very design level. The second thing is really the will to look in the trench in where these things have been done. Certainly there will be a lot of hijack, manipulations and all of that to favor some, discard some. Some people may personalize some issues and all of that. And before you know it, also the important thing is that it's some kind of credible process And we must also know that it's going to be an iterative thing, because in the wings of the implementation of the Oronsanye Report, a whole lot of other institutional changes will be incidented. And unless it's understood in terms of its systemic implication, unfortunately, we might be destroying the system rather than, because a lot of the agencies that we're talking about are really technical harm of ministerial structures. So that would be in terms of reform phobia, well, Nigeria, the incentive for current reform is irreducible and inescapable, because it's more of where can we get expenditure reduction. And Nigeria has to do very many more, because the spate of institutional multiplication, in fact, Nigeria uses all its wealth to service institutions. So, and some fundamentals have to be sorted. First of all, we need to get back to the macro issue of what is the role of the state relative to other sectors of the economy. As we have it now, structures that we have are not different from the structure of the, of the public sector as we had it when the state was in the commanding height of the economy. So it means that there are so many institutions that are unnecessary, and that there are so many competencies that the system needs that there is no space to feed in. Also, the incentive structure is terrible, and you need the best brain to run the public sector. But it does appear that the Nigerian public sector runs a policy of employing 1,000 mediocres, where 200 experts, properly paid and remunerated, will do a better job.
Indeed, the institutional changes brings me to my next question, Prof. The focus of the implementation of this report at a time like this is to save costs or to increase costs for the government. But does this implementation also address associated problems in the public service of corruption, nepotism, and inefficiency? Is this the silver bullet?
Well, the whole issue of, again, like you have said, the Oronsanye Committee is addressing only a subset of the entire public sector or public service. It's only addressing parastatal commissions, and agencies. Now, he's not addressing the core ministerial structure. So he's not addressing a whole range of other institutions, military, police, and all. He's not. So in terms of the corruption, yes, that's another stream, the stream of strengthening the accountability framework. Where are the areas of leakages, that the system witnesses? And for me, this also can be achieved. And that's the point I made earlier, that if government wants to save significant money, then what they need to do is to do a mix of public expenditure review and productivity audit. When you do a productivity audit of institution, you ask yourself, what is the core function of this agency or ministry? How is it structured to deliver its function? What are the money levels? Then how does C play out? You can simulate the operation. Then you can begin to say, what are the core functionalities that are critical to that system? Now, where are the more funds being expended? Then you can begin to see where a whole lot of savings can be made. A lot of savings, for example, could be made. For example, during the COVID-19, perhaps the public service is the only system that could not operate online. Why? Because a whole lot of its processes that ordinarily should have been automated have not been. So there is no backend to support such structure. So in order to be able to, for me, to be able to begin to address corruption issue, is just to be able to redo another, productivity or the management research and look at where are the areas that are creating leakages, because government only penalize those that steal through accounts and all of that, not in terms of tracing the processes and how the leakages happen. So, for example, see how much has been saved through the automation of pension, through IPs and salaries. So a whole lot of other processes, projects can be automated, projects track, procurement processes, and all of that. And there can then be remote auditing, which can, through some dashboard, throwing up data that can be, showing where leakages are happening. So for me, Nigeria, the public sector simply needs to modernize. And when we do that, a whole range of the proxies, a lot of the loopholes that are creating waste and that are creating, the loopholes that people exploit for corruption would then have been addressed.
Well, Prof, earlier on you used the word territoriality, which in fact was part of what we observed during the review of the original report by the Oronsanye Committee. And there is no guarantee that this time around also that ministers, political stakeholders will not try to resist this attempt at reform. Now, if that were to happen, how should government address it? Because in rationalizing, in restructuring, this is Nigeria. There will be factors that will come in like ethnicity, like religion, like territoriality, which you refer to. Are there lessons we can learn from other jurisdictions that have also carried out public sector reform?
What countries do, and I can quickly cite the example of the UK under Thatcher, is to bring in high-profile people who work with experts. For example, when UK was going to start its reform in 1979 or 80, it brought in Lorena, who was the MD of Marks and Spencer. And when he came, he assembled the leading thinkers, the public administration expert at the time, and they looked at the system. So what the government needs to do is to ensure that this is not just placed into the hands of very frivolous people who want to achieve some, extraneous objective. I also think Chief Obasanjo did the same in 1999 when he was looking at the system. He brought in Dr. Christopher Collade. And when people were trying to lobby him, they then knew that he was not a man that is, capable of being manipulated. So in terms of being able to implement these, two things will be critical. One is the first of integrity of the process. The second is the competence. You can bring in a whole lot of, integrity. What I call in my research, there can be passion without knowledge. So there will be, the important thing is that, and what normally happens is that maybe you can then get maybe a backstopping of a major consulting firm, or maybe a collegiate of critical experts who does the back-end analytics and all of that. So in that case, and of course the high level,
Professor Olaopa, I do hate to interrupt your line of thought, but we have to go on a quick break. When we return, you will conclude on that point and we'll ask you further questions. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. We still have with us Professor Tunji Olaopa of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. He's joining us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much for staying with us. Actually, he's joining us from his home this morning. Thank you so much, Professor Olaopa, for staying with us. You were making a point responding to Dr. Abati's earlier question before that break. Would you like to conclude on that before I ask you my next question?
Yeah, I've actually, trashed that issue. The last thing I would have loved to say, I think, is just to rehash, to say that the government should know that the change management dynamics might be susceptible to manipulation and to politics. And government knows what to do in that situation. What you need to do is to ensure that the leadership and direction for that process is managed by people that are very credible and that people who have the love of country. The other thing is the whole issue of people fearing job losses and the government taking a decision. Well, again, the government must document the numbers. Okay, so how many staff, how many redundancies are incidental to the implementation of the Oronsanye Report. And they must then be able to profile those that are thrown up and then do a systematic redeployment rather than just a sweeping thing that people start lobbying, using their own people and all of that. Again, if the system is studied properly, one will discover that even as we speak, there are still a lot of functional units that are not required, and there are a whole range of new ones that are needed that don't have to be normal agents, that don't have to be budget sculpting. So it's just a question of rethinking the structure so that people's competency can then be used. Then you must be able to put time series in terms of what's the age of people affected, how many years would they. Then you must do cost-benefit analysis and say, okay, so what's the cost of, taking these people through what you might call an employability program? You can say, okay, we give ourselves about 5 years. In fact, you can do that across the board and say that everyone that has about 5 or more, or less, or something, or less to go, can be taken through a track of retraining with the sole purpose of, in the assumption that post-COVID, there will be a lot of stimulus, there will be a lot of demand, the economy will boost, maybe the oil will pick up again and all of that. So in the assumption that capacity utilization will go on, so a lot of these competencies can then be mainstream and some of them can also start SMEs and all. Also, what is important is that government must relate to number, do analytics, take strategic decisions rather than just align the system.
Indeed, we've identified that this committee and its report focus on the public service. However, we do know that the public service supports the political structure, the existing one. So I wonder what your take is on the argument of those who say it would be hypocritical to reform the public service, but not look at the political structure that is existing, which they say is too expensive and cannot be sustained, especially with the wake of COVID-19, layering bare the economic downturns that already exist. So what is your take? Because they say even this current administration has had to expand ministries, for instance, from 37 in its first term to 43 in the second term. So should we not be looking beyond the public service, look at the executive as a whole, the ministries, and perhaps even extend to the legislature?
Well, thank you for that point. And that is the real issue. When the nation is ready to bite the bullet, when the nation is ready to understand its predicament, then they will understand that, some palliatives as Oronsanye is not the answer in terms of cost of governance. This cost of governance starts from a hard developmental federalism that services institution and bureaucracy rather than serve development. The second is that we have adopted presidentialism that was not properly interrogated. I mean, there are different models to, presidentialism. Some we needn't have set up a whole architecture that replicates what American, presidential system does. We should have looked at that which we could, service and we could sustainably maintain. So for me, like you said, the government itself, and that is the old issue about the econometrics of number. What are we talking in terms of cost of governance, in terms of cost of development? As we speak, the cost to build Nigerian infrastructure is far more than government can ever have. So it means that you need a lot of savings on the system. So we need to look crudely. We need to look at so many things like even in the institution of the public service, we have a practice where every agency has offices in all the, state of the federation, virtually all. It's ridiculous. What the entire world is doing is a joint system. You have a kind of a nodal point that services virtually all federal and all of that. Then we have a bicameral legislature. Really do we need it? So there are so many dimensions to the waste. The government funding pilgrimage, government having 42 ministries. But so when we do efficient target and say, okay, so what kind of resources is possible to save? So when you look at all of that, then it should be possible to set an efficient target and say, come, listen. As a nation, we want to move to recurrent being not more than 50% of the entire budget. Then we can then be working the arithmetic around it. And of course, like you said, that's not going to happen. You are having in the state, for example, a governor having as many as 100, senior special assistant. These are ridiculous. These are pressures, unnecessary pressures in my state, in Oyo State, for my last check. When the allocation from FAC gets to the state, the entire thing under Ajima was handed to unions, and it's not even adequate to pay salary. So a whole lot of those ranges, then the whole issue of when the federal government decide on minimum wage, every state must pay, even if they don't have the capacity to pay. These are not developmental thinking. It shows that we are a nation that don't understand what development means. So we need to sit down and replan the entire development matrix and make sure it's aligned to being developmental.
Prof, yeah, that point is very clear. I agree with you absolutely. But if we may just do a content review of the Oronsanye Report, there have been some controversies in the media about some of those recommendations that were either accepted by the Jonathan administration or rejected. And many of those suggestions also, the response is just noted. Now, when government says it has noted something, it means that it doesn't quite intend to take action on it. But from your own review of the content and the suggestions, do you think that the Buhari administration, between now and October, deadline that it has given, we still need to review that Oronsanye report? And in your own view, are there some ministries, some agencies, some parastatals or commissions that you think should be consolidated or should be scrapped completely, regardless of the recommendations from the Oronsanye committee?
My take is very simple. Let the government take on the bits that were in the white paper as the first step. In the back of that, in the implementation of that, let there be a study to determine how we can move from close to 70% of budget being recurrent. Then we can then be asking questions. So what else needs to be done? And for me, the second phase would be take another look at the Oronsanye report and see whether a whole lot of those that were noted, rejected, were actually induced by pressure and all of that, whether the thinking behind them were right. And the third would then be, as we are doing that, it should be running parallel. You should also look at the ministerial structure, the ministries that are not implicated in the Oronsanye Report, and ask yourself, do we need to have a minister each from the 36 plus 1 states of the Federation? Can the economy support it? Can we not begin another conversation? Can we not reduce the entire ministries by half? So it's only when we are beginning to think along that line, really we are beginning to think development.
Well, Professor Olaopa, you were right when you said as at then there were 541 parastatals, commissions, and agencies. 8 years down the line or so, they're almost about 1,000. Now, when you look at the acts establishing these parastatals or agencies or commissions that are to be reviewed, abolished, and whatnot, do you think that the October deadline will be feasible? Briefly.
Well, sincerely, you cannot put a timeline to implementation until you bring out the instruments and analyze it. Insofar as some of those are statutory and they are created by law, the Attorney General needs to do a quick review to be able to help the government to do the facing, which one can be done without necessarily going back to the National Assembly for some kind of, adjustment. And that's going to take a little while. So, but for me, the question of I will finish in before October looks to me like a military with immediate effect kind of sense. So the nitty-gritty will need to, again, the government, there are also some clauses in the labor law that enable the president under presidential system of proceed in lieu of required amendment to the law. So administratively, a lot could be achieved, but whether 263 being reduced to 161 and all of those that are abolished can be achieved before October, I would be able to I'll be very circumspect. I will be able to make a statement on it when I've reviewed, when I've done a content analysis, and I have then been able to, do facing based on fact.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Olaopa, for your time and for joining us this morning on The Morning Show. Thank you very much indeed.